Okay, so back from our cheese break, let's continue. So what is Docker Desktop? Desktop is an app that you install on Mac, Linux, or Windows. You notice I point out Linux. So I hope that the tools, the applications get more mature on Linux in the near future, where when I have to replace this commercial desktop, I'm going to get rid of it and go pure open source, because I'm just, all the defects, why am I paying for them? So the Docker Desktop is available on Linux. There's a UI and CLI tools to build and manage containers, but I do everything from the CLI. On Windows, you'll do this from PowerShell. On Linux or Mac OS, you're going to do it all right there from the operating system. It's native. What this should suggest to you, and I stand by this, is that if you're doing heavy development work, your best platform is either Linux or Mac OS.
You need Docker Desktop installed in that?
You are, yes. You're going to need to do this in order to build the solution. And there is an add-on for simulating orchestration on Kubernetes. So after you build your infrastructure, you can then proceed after you do your setup for kube control to manage the cluster. Terraform is a declarative language that abstracts infrastructure into human readable code. It's not always human readable. It often is not. The code can be versioned and shared. It can manage infrastructure as service, as well as some SaaS providers have Terraform plugins. PaaS, platform as a service. Database as a service, from my perspective, is just a marketing term. That's a platform as a service. And Terraform can also, and this is the really important thing, Terraform can manage your on-prem infrastructure. So one Terraform language, one Azure DevOps to manage it all. We all know what GitHub is. We already talked about large file support, so I'm not going to spend any more time there. Visual Studio Code is the de facto standard IDE, integrated development environment, that we use. There are other IDEs out there. They're talked about a lot in Udemy training. I just wish these guys would get with the program. It's Visual Studio Code, it's free. And why does it matter to me? Because the Git integration is super duper. One, and then that's really important when I'm doing branching, and I want to make sure I'm in the right branch. The marketplace plugins are huge for the extensions. So you just can't name all the extensions that are available in Visual Studio Code. So at a standard in most organizations, especially Microsoft shops. Azure DevOps is a tool that provides developer services and empowers teams to collaborate on code development. If you're using Azure DevOps, if you're using the Kanban board, if you're using backlogs, if you're using all those tools, then you're talking less often in meetings, and you're collaborating more online. It enables you to move faster and become more agile, assuming that you've developed your DevOps and executed your DevOps strategy, and that you've changed the culture in your organization. It includes services that we just talked about, such as pipeline management, Kanban, backlogs, all the things that you read about in the Phoenix Project, that they are there. this is a tool, or these are tools. They won't make you more capable at walking the talk with DevOps. They won't create strategy or business process. They will not make you agile. You should develop a DevOps change-enabled strategy before using these tools in an enterprise capacity. Now, typically that's done by incubating, where you take an area of the organization and you incubate the idea, you incubate the strategy. And then it starts to take hold. If it's successful, it'll start to take hold because other peers will see it and say, wow, they're happy and they're fast. I want to be that way. And then ideally, when you incubate, you have executive sponsorship for incubating. And then the executive says, yeah, so-and-so is spearheading our DevOps culture incubation, or whatever branding she or he would apply to that. That helps, because then people take notice. To incubate without executive support, you can still do it, but it may die on the vine. So you should pilot the strategy is basically what I was just been saying here. Now, we're going to be doing this next. We're going to be preparing for the build. That is going to involve signing up for your trial accounts for Azure and AWS. You should already have a GitHub account. You're going to install Docker Desktop. You're going to install Git. You're going to pull a simple Ubuntu Docker image and run it on your desktop just to prove that it works. Then you're going to clone the Git repository. And you're going to create your own private repository in your GitHub account. And you're going to create the master branch and push your code to it. You cannot use Azure DevOps without some form of CSV repository. And the default for the default name of the branch, I recommend be called master, not main. When Microsoft acquired GitHub, the default branch name was and still is main. In Visual Studio Enterprise, and now in Azure DevOps, the default branch name is master. And I cannot tell you how many times I've gotten tripped up on this. So if you name your master, your main branch master every time, you won't have to worry about remembering this. I do not advocate that you set Azure DevOps pipelines to trigger on branches other than master. It adds so much work and complexity to the development effort. Now, you may want to consider triggering on a release branch for a development pipeline that you develop, where when you trigger on that release branch, it then pushes out. That's not a bad thing. I just like to do everything on master, and I'll show you how you can enable and disable a pipeline. So typically, if I'm getting ready to develop for something, for a project, I will make sure that both my sandbox and the production pipelines are disabled in Azure DevOps, specifically the development pipelines. This way, when I trigger to master, if I do something wrong or I did something and I didn't mean to do that, production's not going to change and my development pipeline's not going to run. And then when I'm ready to actually test it, I'll enable the development pipeline in my sandbox subscription. And then I'll go ahead and push a change. And I'll make sure it's all debugged, so on and so forth. And then I'll move to the final stage, which will be to point everything in the code to what will be production, and then I get ready to push that out. Now, this would have to be varied based on your organizational structure and your process. So that's why I pointed out that in your development environment, when you set up your DevOps pipeline, you probably want to trigger on a release, not on master. But in production, always trigger on master. So I think that we are getting into the lab session. So we're actually going to do the lab work. I'm going to stop this and we're going to get started doing the things that we have to do.